31 years. That's how long I'd been married when I overheard my wife planning to take everything I'd spent my life building and hand it to someone else. I wasn't supposed to be in that building that morning. I wasn't supposed to hear any of it. But I did. And once you hear something like that, you can't unhear it. You can't go back to the version of yourself that didn't know. My name isn't important. What matters is this. I was 63 years old. I had given my entire adult life to a company I built from nothing, and I was standing in a hallway I'd walked 1,000 times, completely invisible to the woman who slept beside me every night for 4 decades. Let me back up. I started Callaway Structural in 1987 out of a rented garage in Lansing, Michigan. I had a drafting table, a used truck, and a loan my father-in-law had to co-sign because no bank would touch me. I did everything myself in the early years. Bids, site visits, payroll. I missed my daughter's first birthday because I was in Toledo finishing a commercial foundation pour that couldn't wait. I missed my son's high school graduation because a project in Cincinnati had gone sideways and the client was threatening to sue. I am not proud of those things. I am telling you because I want you to understand what I gave to build what I built. By 2019, Callaway Structural had 47 full-time employees, 3 regional offices, and a reputation in the Midwest that took 30 years to earn. We weren't flashy. We didn't do glass towers or luxury condos. We did schools, hospitals, municipal infrastructure, the kind of work that matters and nobody notices until it fails. My wife. I'll call her my wife because that's what she was. Even now I struggle to say her name without my jaw tightening. She had come into the business in 2003. At the time, it seemed like the right move. The kids were older, she wanted something to do, and I thought having her involved would bring us closer. She had a sharp mind for finances, I'll give her that. Within 2 years, she had renegotiated our insurance contracts and consolidated 3 separate accounting systems into one. She was good at it. Better than good. What I didn't see, what I was too proud or too trusting or too distracted to see, was that she had also, quietly, begun building a version of the company that didn't need me in it. I noticed things over the years. Small things. Meetings I wasn't told about. Conversations that stopped when I walked into a room. A shift in how certain employees looked at me. Not disrespectfully, but carefully. The way you look at someone when you know something they don't. I told myself I was getting paranoid. I told myself this was what happened when a man got older and started feeling less essential. I told myself a lot of things that turned out to be wrong. The person who eventually showed me the truth was a man named Eckhart. Doug Eckhart. He'd been our facilities manager for 11 years. Quiet man, early 50s. Never said more than he needed to. He had a daughter with medical expenses, and I had helped him work out a payment arrangement with his insurance years back. He hadn't forgotten that. I hadn't thought about it in years. On a Tuesday in March, Doug came to my office and closed the door behind him. He said, "I need to tell you something and I need you to hear me out before you say anything." I told him to sit down. He didn't sit. He stood near the door like he might need to leave quickly. "There's a meeting today," he said, "at 2 o'clock, conference room B. Your wife set it up. She's been meeting with Aldridge Capital for the past 4 months. I knew the name. Aldridge Capital was a private equity group out of Columbus. They had a reputation for buying into mid-sized regional firms, restructuring them, and either flipping them or folding them into larger portfolios. I had been approached by 2 similar firms over the years and had turned both of them down without a second thought. "My wife set it up," I said. "Yes, sir." "Without telling me." Doug looked at the floor. "The meeting today is to finalize terms. From what I've been able to understand, and I want to be clear, I only know pieces of this, the arrangement involves her taking over as sole operating officer. There's language being discussed about your capacity to continue leading the company." I sat very still. "My capacity," I said. He nodded, still not looking at me. "There have been some emails. I wasn't meant to see them. Someone CC'd me by mistake last month, and I've been trying to figure out what to do ever since." He finally looked up. "I'm sorry." I didn't know how to come to you with this sooner. I asked him where the conference room was in relation to the executive suite. I asked him if there was a way to reach the room without going through the main corridor. He told me there was a service hallway that connected the building's east wing to the back of that floor. Facilities staff used it for HVAC access. I told Doug to go back to his work and act like nothing had happened. I told him I would handle it. I told him, and I meant this, that I was grateful, that what he'd done took more courage than most people had. He left. I sat at my desk for 40 minutes and looked at a photograph on the wall. It was a picture of the groundbreaking for a middle school we built in Grand Rapids in 2008. My wife was in the photo. She was laughing at something. I was standing next to her with a shovel and a hard hat, and the kind of expression a man has when he believes he's building something that will last. I walked to the service corridor at 10 minutes before 2. The hallway was narrow and smelled like electrical insulation and old concrete. I found the access point Doug had described, a ventilation panel that opened into a utility space adjacent to the conference room wall. The panel was already ajar. Doug must have unlocked it earlier. I stood in that space and I listened. My wife was already in the room. So was a man I didn't recognize. Younger, mid-40s, the kind of groomed confidence that comes from a certain kind of business school education. And there was a woman, older, probably early 60s, who I later learned was the senior acquisitions partner from Aldridge. They were talking about transition timelines. My wife said he's been resistant to change for the past few years. It's been a challenge managing around it. The man from Aldridge said something about documentation. She said, "We have it. His physician, not our family doctor, someone I brought in for a second opinion, has noted some concerns about his executive functioning. Nothing definitive, but enough to support a capacity evaluation if we need to go that route." I pressed my back against the concrete wall and breathed very slowly. The woman from Aldridge said, "Is there a risk he challenges the evaluation?" My wife said, "By the time he understands what's happening, the paperwork will already be filed. He trusts me. He's always trusted me. That's the thing about men like him. They build something and they think that's all they have to do. They stop paying attention." I don't know how long I stood there after that. It felt like a long time, long enough for them to move on to talking about earn-out structures and equity distributions, long enough for me to understand that the meeting had clearly been rehearsed, long enough to understand that this had been in motion for a long time, and I had seen none of it. She trusted me not to be paying attention. She was right that I had trusted her. She was wrong about the rest. I walked back through the service corridor. I went to my office. I closed the door. I want to be honest about what the next hour felt like. I'm a 63-year-old man who does not cry easily. I cried that afternoon, not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, at my desk in a way I hadn't cried since my father's funeral 12 years ago. Not because I was afraid, because I was grieving, because 41 years is not nothing, and even when you find out what a person is capable of, you're still mourning the version of them you believed in for all that time. I gave myself an hour. Then I called my attorney. His name is Fenwick. He's been my corporate counsel for 22 years. I told him what I'd heard. He was quiet on the phone for a moment, and then he said very carefully, "Don't do anything. Don't confront her. Don't change anything at the office. Come see me tomorrow morning. Bring your phone." I said, "Is there anything I can do tonight?" He said, "Tonight you go home and act like you don't know. Can you do that?" I thought about it. "Yes," I said. That was the hardest part. Not the legal process that followed. Not the months of forensic accounting and depositions and filings. The hardest thing I did in this entire ordeal was drive home that evening, sit across the dinner table from my wife, and talk about nothing. She asked how my day was. I said it was fine. A little slow. She said she was thinking about the kitchen renovation again, the one we'd been putting off for 2 years. She asked if I thought we should finally move on it. I said, "Sure, that sounded like a good idea. Let's think about it." I watched her face while she talked, and I kept looking for some sign of what I now knew, some crack, some trace of guilt, some signal that she understood what she was doing to me. There was nothing. She was completely comfortable. That was, in some ways, the most disturbing part of all of it. I am not going to walk you through every detail of the next 8 months. Some of it is still in legal proceedings. What I can tell you is this. Fenwick brought in a forensic accountant named Sorrells, a woman with the personality of a steel trap and the patience of someone who has spent 30 years finding things people thought they'd hidden. Within 6 weeks, she had documented 4 years of unauthorized financial restructuring. My wife had, through a series of incremental moves, positioned herself as the effective controlling officer of the company's operating LLC, while my ownership stake had been quietly diluted through subsidiary arrangements I had signed off on without understanding their cumulative effect. Most of those signatures, Sorrells found, had been obtained through documents that misrepresented their purpose. I had signed things I believed were routine amendments. They were not. The physician my wife had brought in, the one who had documented concerns about my executive functioning, turned out to have a financial relationship with a consulting group that Aldridge Capital used regularly. That connection became relevant to Fenwick very quickly. The man in the conference room was an Aldridge VP named Truscott. He and my wife had been in contact for over 2 years. Whether their relationship extended beyond business, I genuinely don't know, and I decided I didn't need to know in order to protect what was mine. I did not confront my wife. Not once. In 8 months did I say anything to her about what I knew. People ask me how I managed that, and I don't have a satisfying answer. I think when you spent 4 decades building something, you develop a certain capacity for long-term thinking. You learn to delay. You learn that the satisfying thing and the effective thing are rarely the same thing. The morning Fenwick was ready to file, I came to the office early. I sat at my desk and I thought about the garage in Lansing. The drafting table, my father-in-law's signature on a loan document. I thought about 100 conversations with my wife in the early years, sitting up late at the kitchen table, going over bids, arguing about whether to take on a particular client, laughing about things I can barely remember now. I thought about what it meant that all of that had happened and had been real and had also apparently not been enough. When she arrived that morning, I was already in the conference room. Not conference room B, the main board room on the executive floor, where we had signed our first major municipal contract 28 years ago. She walked in and looked at me and at Fenwick and at Searles, and she understood immediately. She said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "How long have you known?" I said, "Long enough." She sat down. Her attorney, someone she had apparently retained months earlier, was not present. That was a miscalculation on her part. She had not expected me to move when I did. Fenwick placed the filing documents on the table. She looked at them and she said quietly, "I was trying to protect the company." I looked at her for a long time before I answered. I said, "You were trying to take the company. Those are not the same thing." She started to say something else and I said, "Don't. Please don't." She didn't. The divorce was settled 11 months later. I retained controlling interest in Callaway Structural. She received a financial settlement that was fair, in my opinion, given 41 years of marriage, and considerably less than she would have received had the Aldridge deal gone through. Truscott and Aldridge Capital are no longer involved. The physician who provided the capacity documentation is currently under review by the State Medical Board. Doug Eckhart got a raise. He also got a standing invitation to my office anytime he wants to talk about anything at all. That man's willingness to come through my door and tell me the truth when he had every reason not to. I think about that more than I think about almost anything else in this story. My daughter called me after the divorce was finalized. She said, "Dad, are you okay?" I told her the truth. I said I wasn't sure yet. I said I was 64 years old, and I was starting over in ways I hadn't expected to be starting over, and that some days it felt like loss and some days it felt like something else. I told her I was still going to work every morning. I told her the company was still standing. She said, "That's all I needed to hear." My son hasn't spoken to me since the filing. He believes his mother's account of things. I understand that. He's her child, too. I hope eventually the facts will be clear enough that we find our way back to each other. I'm not going to force it. There's something I've thought about a great deal in the months since all of this resolved. Something I keep coming back to. When I was standing in that service corridor, listening through a wall to my wife describe me as someone who had stopped paying attention, She wasn't entirely wrong. I had stopped paying attention. Not to the company, not to the work, but to her, to us, to the accumulation of small distances that build up between people over decades when they're too busy to address them in real time. I am not saying what she did was justified. It was not, but I am saying that somewhere in those 41 years, something had gone quiet between us. And instead of addressing it, I'd built more buildings and told myself that was love. I don't know if that's wisdom or just the story I'm telling myself to make sense of something that doesn't fully make sense. What I know is this: I still go to work every morning. I still walk the same hallways. Last fall, we broke ground on a new wing at a pediatric rehabilitation center in Kalamazoo. And I stood at that groundbreaking in a hard hat and looked out at the foundation pour and thought about my father-in-law's signature on that original loan. He passed away in 2014. He never knew what his daughter did. I think about that too. The company is 41 years old, same age as my marriage was when it ended. I've decided to take that as something other than irony. The company is still standing. It is still doing the kind of work that matters. It still has my name on it. Some things you build last. You just have to be willing to protect them when the time comes. Even when protecting them costs you everything you thought you had. I've thought a lot about what actually happened in that service corridor. Not the legal part, the human part. The part where a 63-year-old man stands in a dark hallway and understands, all at once, that the life he believed he was living was not entirely the life that was being lived around him. People ask me if I regret not seeing it sooner. I don't think regret is the right word. What I feel is something more like accountability. Because the truth is, I was a man who believed that building things was the same as paying attention. I built a company. I built a reputation. I built a life that looked from the outside like everything a man could want, and I told myself that the building was enough. That the work spoke for itself. That my wife knew what I felt, even when I didn't say it, because the company was proof of it. Proof that I showed up. Proof that I didn't quit. Proof of something. But proof of what exactly? That I was capable? That I was disciplined? Maybe. What it was not proof of was presence. And there is a difference between a man who builds and a man who stays. I had spent 40 years being the first kind of man. I am not sure I had been enough of the second. I'm not excusing what she did. There is no version of this story where what she did was acceptable. She looked at the person who had trusted her with everything: his name, his work, his finances, his health records. And she decided that trust was a resource to be used. That is a choice, and choices like that carry consequences that cannot be undone by circumstance or explanation. But here is what I've come to understand. The consequences of her choices and the consequences of mine are not the same thing, and they don't cancel each other out. She will live with what she did. I will live with what I didn't do. Those are separate accountings. What Doug did, walking into my office and closing that door, standing near it like he might need to leave, telling me the truth when he had every practical reason not to, that has stayed with me more than almost anything else. He wasn't obligated. There was no policy that required him to come forward. He came because years earlier I had treated him like a person when he was in a difficult situation, and he had not forgotten that. That is the whole of it. One decent thing remembered. That is what saved my company. I think about that when people ask me what I've learned. I've learned that the things you do when no one is watching, the small courtesies, the quiet moments of decency toward people who can't do anything for you, those things do not disappear. They settle somewhere. They wait. And sometimes, when you need them most, they come back to you through someone else's courage. I've also learned that patience is not the same as passivity. I sat across a dinner table from my wife for 8 months and said nothing. That was not weakness. That was the hardest, most deliberate thing I have ever done. I was 63 years old, and I was learning, for the first time in my adult life, how to be still and let the truth do its own work. Callaway Structural is still standing. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, everything.